As the gentle evening light fades over the ancient sands of Upper Egypt, where the patient work of archaeologists and manuscript scholars continues, revealing glimpses of humanity's earliest spiritual wisdom through careful analysis of fragmented papyri and weathered codices, we begin tonight a peaceful journey into one of the most profound and mysterious figures in ancient religious thought, Barbelo, the enigmatic first creator whose divine nature has been preserved in secret texts hidden for over 16 centuries beneath the protective desert sands near Nag Hammadi. Let your mind drift serenely through the quiet world of early Christian mysticism and Gnostic spirituality, where ancient scribes carefully copied theological treatises that described a cosmic figure both familiar and revolutionary, a divine being who embodied the first emanation of the ineffable God while transcending traditional categories of male and female, creator and created, known and unknowable. Close your eyes and feel the profound reverence that must have filled ancient scriptoriums as monastic communities preserved these sacred texts that spoke of divine mysteries extending back to the very origins of existence itself, where the boundary between God and creation dissolves into the flowing dance of eternal emanation and return. Picture yourself in the hushed reading rooms of modern research libraries, where scholars of Gnostic literature continue their patient work with ancient Coptic manuscripts that have revealed theological concepts of breathtaking sophistication and spiritual insight, texts that describe Barbelo as the perfect eon, the glory of the invisible spirit, and the triple androgynous name, whose divine nature encompasses both the masculine and feminine aspects of ultimate reality while remaining eternally beyond all human categories and conceptual limitations. The discovery of these remarkable documents in December 1945 near the Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi transformed our understanding of early Christian diversity while revealing spiritual traditions that had been lost to mainstream Christianity for over 1500 years, creating opportunities for contemporary seekers to encounter forms of ancient wisdom that approach the divine through radically different theological frameworks than those preserved in canonical scriptures. The profound mystery that surrounds Barbelo's nature reflects the sophisticated theological thinking of ancient Gnostic communities who understood that ultimate reality transcends ordinary language and conceptual thinking, requiring symbolic narratives and mystical poetry to communicate truths that cannot be captured through literal description or systematic doctrine. These early Christian mystics developed elaborate cosmological systems that described the emergence of creation through a series of divine emanations, with Barbelo serving as the first and most perfect reflection of the unknowable God. Simultaneously, the Divine Mother who gives birth to all existence and the eternal mirror in which the ineffable Father contemplates his own infinite nature. Watch as the ancient theological imagination unfolds through careful study of texts like the Apocryphon of John, where Barbelo emerges as the first thought of the Supreme God, the pronoia or divine forethought that becomes the active principle through which the passive transcendence of the ultimate source expresses itself in the creative activity that gives rise to the multiplicity of spiritual and material worlds. The text describes how the invisible God, existing in perfect silence and incomprehensible transcendence, gazes into the primordial waters and sees reflected there his own image, which becomes Barbelo, the perfect eon who serves as both the creative womb of all existence and the eternal companion of the Divine Father in the mysterious dance of cosmic generation and return. The remarkable theological sophistication of these ancient Gnostic treatises challenges contemporary readers to expand their understanding of early Christian thought while recognizing that the spiritual seekers who preserved these texts possessed profound insights into the nature of divine reality that emerged from centuries of mystical experience and contemplative practice. The figure of Barbelo represents one of the most developed examples of divine feminine theology in ancient Christianity, presenting a cosmic principle that encompasses maternal creativity, wisdom, and spiritual authority while maintaining perfect unity with the transcendent masculine aspect of ultimate reality. The historical context that produced these remarkable theological developments includes the rich spiritual diversity that characterized the Eastern Mediterranean world during the first 4 centuries of the Common Era, when Jewish mysticism, Greek philosophical theology, and emerging Christian spirituality interacted to create new synthetic approaches to understanding divine reality and human spiritual potential. The communities that venerated Barbelo drew upon this diverse intellectual heritage while developing distinctive practices and beliefs that emphasized direct spiritual experience, esoteric knowledge, and the ultimate unity between the human soul and its divine source. The preservation of Barbelo's story through the Nag Hammadi manuscripts reflects the dedication of ancient monastic communities who recognized the spiritual value of these texts even as they became increasingly marginalized by the developing Orthodox Christian consensus that emphasized different theological priorities and institutional structures. The careful copying and binding of these codices required enormous resources and commitment from communities that understood themselves as guardians of essential spiritual wisdom that might otherwise be lost to future generations seeking authentic encounters with divine mystery. The scholarly rediscovery of these ancient texts in the mid-20th century has enabled contemporary researchers to reconstruct more accurate pictures of early Christian diversity while recognizing that the theological traditions labeled as Gnostic by their ancient critics represented sophisticated attempts to address fundamental questions about the nature of divine reality, human spiritual potential, and the ultimate meaning of existence that continue challenging religious thinkers today. The figure of Barbelo serves as a particularly compelling example of how ancient spiritual communities developed theological concepts that transcended conventional religious categories while remaining grounded in authentic mystical experience and contemplative insight. The interpretive challenges that face contemporary scholars studying Barbelo and related Gnostic theological concepts include not only the difficulties of reconstructing ancient religious practices from fragmentary textual evidence but also the need to approach these materials with appropriate appreciation for their spiritual significance while maintaining scholarly objectivity and methodological rigor. The complex symbolism and mythological narratives that characterize Gnostic literature require careful analysis that recognizes both their historical specificity and their continuing relevance for understanding human spiritual experience across cultural and temporal boundaries. The theological implications of taking Barbelo seriously as a divine figure extend beyond academic interest in ancient religious history to encompass contemporary discussions about gender and divinity, the relationship between transcendence and immanence in divine nature, and the possibility of direct mystical knowledge that transcends ordinary religious authority and institutional mediation. The ancient Gnostic presentation of Barbelo as simultaneously transcendent and immanent, masculine and feminine, creator and created offers valuable resources for contemporary theology while challenging modern religious communities to expand their understanding of divine nature and human spiritual potential. The mystical dimensions of Barbelo's nature invite contemplative engagement rather than merely intellectual analysis, as the ancient texts consistently emphasize that true knowledge of divine reality emerges through direct spiritual experience rather than conceptual study or doctrinal memorization. The communities that venerated Barbelo understood their theological narratives as maps for spiritual transformation rather than literal descriptions of cosmic events, using mythological language to communicate truths about consciousness, divine nature, and spiritual development that transcend ordinary linguistic and conceptual limitations. As we begin this gentle exploration of Barbelo's remarkable nature and the ancient spiritual traditions that preserved her memory, we enter a realm where theological sophistication meets mystical insight, where ancient wisdom challenges contemporary assumptions about divine reality while offering profound resources for understanding the eternal human quest for authentic spiritual knowledge and transformative encounter with the ultimate source of existence. The patient work of scholars and spiritual seekers continues, revealing new dimensions of Barbelo's significance while demonstrating how much we still have to learn about the remarkable achievements of early Christian mysticism and the diverse theological traditions that flourished during Christianity's formative centuries. The gentle evening breeze that flows through research libraries and ancient manuscript collections carries continuing invitations to wonder, to contemplate, and to appreciate. Both the intellectual sophistication and spiritual insight that characterize the ancient traditions that preserved Barbelo's story, reminding us that some religious truths transcend the boundaries between past and present, between scholarly investigation and personal spiritual quest, between ancient wisdom and contemporary seeking. As the gentle December sun rises over the limestone cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif in Upper Egypt, where the eternal Nile flows peacefully through landscapes that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, we drift tonight into the remarkable story of one of archaeology's most serendipitous discoveries. The moment in December 1945 when two peasant brothers, Muhammad and Khalifa Ali of the Al-Saman clan, accidentally unearthed 13 leather-bound codices that would revolutionize our understanding of early Christian diversity while preserving the most complete accounts of Barbelo's divine nature that had survived in secret for over 16 centuries. Let your mind float serenely through the quiet excitement of that historic winter day, where the simple act of digging for sabak fertilizer beneath a massive boulder transformed into one of the most significant manuscript discoveries in human history, revealing Gnostic treasures that included the precious Apocryphon of John. the secret book of John that contains the most extensive theological descriptions of Barbelo ever found. Close your eyes and feel the profound anticipation that must have filled those humble farmers as they hesitated before breaking open the large earthenware jar, wondering whether it contained gold or perhaps something even more valuable. The preserved words of ancient spiritual seekers who had risked everything to maintain their vision of divine truth. Picture yourself standing beside Muhammad Ali al-Saman as he raises his mattock to break the mysterious red clay jar, nearly a meter high, that had been buried beneath protective sediments for over 1,500 years while empires rose and fell above its hidden location. The brothers had tethered their camels to the boulder and were digging around its base for the soft, fertile soil they used to enrich their crops when their tools struck something hard. A discovery that would initially disappoint them when, instead of the hoped-for treasure of gold coins, they found 13 ancient books bound in leather and written in a script they could not read. The careful preservation of these codices through centuries of burial in Egypt's arid climate had maintained the delicate papyrus pages in remarkably good condition, enabling modern scholars to recover nearly complete texts that provided unprecedented insights into the theological sophistication of early Gnostic communities. The extraordinary collection that emerged from that humble earthenware jar represented one of the most important libraries of ancient Christian literature ever discovered. Containing over 50 separate texts that revealed the remarkable diversity of early Christian thought while preserving theological traditions that had been suppressed by Orthodox Christianity during the 4th century. Among these precious manuscripts, the Apocryphon of John appeared in no fewer than 4 separate copies, demonstrating the special reverence that ancient Gnostic communities held for this particular text and its detailed account of Barbelo's role in the cosmic drama of creation and redemption. The multiple versions of this secret book suggest that different communities had preserved and transmitted their own copies of these sacred teachings, creating a rich textual tradition that enabled scholars to reconstruct the most complete picture possible of ancient Barbelo theology. Watch as the scholarly excitement unfolds through the patient work of researchers like Jean Dorès, who first became aware of the discovery in 1946 and spent years carefully documenting the circumstances and contents of this remarkable find, while James Robinson's later investigations in the 1970s revealed the complex story of how these manuscripts had traveled from their ancient burial site through various hands before reaching the attention of international scholars. The process of acquiring, translating, and publishing these texts required decades of careful scholarly collaboration, with portions of the collection eventually finding their way to prestigious institutions including the Coptic Museum in Cairo and the Jung Institute in Zurich, where teams of specialists worked to conserve the fragile papyrus and decipher the ancient Coptic script in which most of the texts had been written. The historical context that produced these remarkable manuscripts reflects the complex religious landscape of 4th century Egypt, where Christian monasticism was flourishing alongside growing pressure from Orthodox authorities to eliminate theological diversity and suppress alternative interpretations of Christian doctrine. The communities that carefully copied and preserved these Gnostic texts understood that their theological traditions were becoming increasingly marginalized by the emerging institutional church, creating urgent needs to safeguard essential spiritual wisdom for future generations of seekers who might benefit from access to alternative approaches to understanding divine reality and human spiritual potential. The careful craftsmanship that characterizes the Nag Hammadi codices demonstrates the high value that ancient communities placed on preserving these texts, with skilled scribes using high-quality papyrus and leather binding techniques that ensured maximum durability while creating books that could be easily transported and hidden when necessary. The systematic organization of different texts within individual codices suggests deliberate editorial decisions about which writings belong together, creating thematic collections that enabled readers to study related theological concepts and spiritual practices through carefully curated combinations of complementary texts and teachings. The Apocryphon of John itself represents one of the most sophisticated theological documents preserved in the entire Nag Hammadi collection, presenting a detailed cosmological narrative that describes Barbelo as the first power, the glory, Barbel, the perfect glory in the eons, the glory of the revelation, who emerges as the divine feminine principle through which the unknowable God first expresses creative activity. The text presents this emergence through poetic language that emphasizes both transcendence and immanence, describing how Barbelo serves simultaneously as the first thought of the divine mind and the active creative principle through which abstract divine perfection manifests as concrete spiritual reality accessible to human consciousness and mystical experience. The preservation challenges that faced these ancient manuscripts throughout their centuries of burial included not only the physical threats of moisture, insects, and mechanical damage, but also the continuing danger of discovery by authorities who might have destroyed these texts as heretical materials dangerous to Orthodox Christian belief and practice. The successful survival of the Nag Hammadi library required both favorable environmental conditions and the careful selection of hiding places that would remain undisturbed while providing adequate protection from the various forces that had already destroyed countless other examples of early Christian literature that failed to receive canonical recognition and institutional support. The scholarly transformation that followed the discovery and publication of the Nag Hammadi texts revolutionized academic understanding of early Christianity by revealing the remarkable theological diversity that had characterized Christian communities during the religion's formative centuries, while challenging simplistic narratives about orthodox development and heretical deviation that had dominated previous scholarship. The availability of primary Gnostic sources enabled researchers to move beyond the hostile descriptions provided by early church fathers like Irenaeus and Epiphanius, creating opportunities for more nuanced appreciation of the intellectual sophistication and spiritual insights that had motivated ancient Gnostic communities in their quest for authentic religious experience and mystical knowledge. The international collaboration that characterized Nag Hammadi scholarship demonstrates how major archaeological discoveries require sustained cooperation between scholars from different cultural backgrounds and institutional affiliations, who contribute diverse expertise to the complex tasks of conservation, translation, interpretation, and publication that ensure important discoveries reach appropriate academic and public audiences. The careful documentation and analysis of these texts has created permanent scholarly resources that enable continued research using improved analytical techniques while providing reliable foundations for ongoing investigations into the history and significance of early Christian theological diversity. The broader implications of the Nag Hammadi discovery extend far beyond academic interest in ancient religious history to encompass contemporary discussions about spiritual authority, religious diversity, and the relationship between institutional Christianity and mystical experience that continue challenging modern religious communities seeking authentic approaches to divine encounter and spiritual transformation. The preservation of Barbelo theology within these ancient manuscripts provides valuable resources for contemporary seekers interested in exploring alternative approaches to understanding divine nature while offering historical perspectives on questions about gender, spirituality, and cosmic consciousness that remain relevant for modern theological reflection and spiritual practice as we contemplate the remarkable circumstances that preserved Barbelo's story through 16 centuries of hiding. Beneath Egyptian sands, we witness the power of dedicated communities to maintain essential spiritual wisdom even under conditions of persecution and institutional opposition, demonstrating how authentic religious insight often survives through the commitment of individuals who recognize the continuing value of alternative theological perspectives for human spiritual development. The patient work of modern scholars continues revealing new dimensions of these ancient discoveries while ensuring that the theological treasures accidentally unearthed by two farming brothers will remain accessible to future generations seeking understanding about the remarkable diversity and sophistication that characterized early Christian spiritual exploration. The gentle desert wind that flows across the discovery site where these manuscripts waited patiently for their moment of revelation carries continuing invitations to appreciate both the dedication of ancient scribes who preserved essential spiritual wisdom and the scholarly commitment that enables contemporary communities to benefit from their courage and foresight in maintaining theological traditions that might otherwise have been lost forever to the forces of institutional conformity and religious homogenization. As the gentle silence of eternity stretches beyond time and space, where no words have yet been spoken and no thoughts have yet been formed, we drift tonight into the most profound mystery that ancient Gnostic minds could contemplate: the existence of the ineffable God in perfect solitude, dwelling in transcendent stillness above and beyond all categories of being and non-being, wrapped in an incomprehensible silence that precedes even the possibility of creation. Let your mind float peacefully into this primordial moment before moments, where the ultimate source of all existence rests in absolute perfection, neither lacking anything nor desiring change, yet containing within its ineffable nature the infinite potential for all the divine emanations that will eventually unfold through the mysterious emergence of Barbelo, the first thought and perfect reflection of the unknowable Father. Close your eyes and feel the profound peace that must have characterized this eternal now before the beginning, where divine perfection contemplated itself in the boundless waters of pure possibility, preparing for the cosmic dance that would bring forth the first emanation of creative power while maintaining forever the transcendent mystery that no created being could ever fully comprehend or contain. Picture yourself suspended in the infinite stillness that preceded all creation, where the Supreme God, described in the Apocryphon of John as a monarchy with nothing above it, exists in perfect self-sufficiency, requiring nothing external for completion, yet containing within its ineffable essence all the fullness that would eventually manifest through the complex hierarchy of divine emanations. The ancient Gnostic understanding of this ultimate reality emphasizes qualities that transcend human conceptual thinking. The Supreme God is described as eternal, endless, perfect, holy, and absolutely transcendent, yet paradoxically present as the source and sustenance of all existence that will emerge through the mysterious process of divine self-reflection and emanation that begins with Barbelo's appearance as the first power and perfect glory. The theological sophistication that characterizes ancient Gnostic descriptions of the pre-creation state reflects profound mystical insights into the nature of ultimate reality, where the ineffable God is understood to be simultaneously transcendent and immanent, utterly beyond all qualities and attributes, yet serving as the source of all the divine qualities that will be distributed among the various emanations and spiritual powers that populate the complex cosmological systems described in texts like the Secret Book of John. This ultimate principle is neither quantifiable nor describable through ordinary language, existing in inconceivable perfection that must be approached through negative theology, understanding what God is not rather than attempting positive descriptions that inevitably fall short of the divine mystery. Watch as the ancient theological imagination approaches this ineffable reality through the symbolism of primordial waters, the boundless, reflective medium in which the Supreme God contemplates the infinite possibilities contained within the divine nature while remaining forever beyond the reach of conceptual thinking or systematic description. These primal waters serve as the cosmic mirror in which divine self-awareness first expresses itself, creating the conditions for the emergence of Barbelo as the first thought and perfect image of the invisible God, the initial stirring of creative activity within the eternal stillness of transcendent perfection. The mystical understanding of divine transcendence that pervades Gnostic theology emphasizes that the ultimate God neither creates directly nor becomes involved in the material processes that characterize the lower levels of cosmic manifestation, instead expressing creative power through the series of emanations that begin with Barbelo and continue through the various eons and spiritual authorities that mediate between the ineffable source and the manifested worlds. This theological framework preserves divine transcendence while accounting for the existence of creation through intermediate principles that serve as bridges between the unknowable God and the complex multiplicity of spiritual and material realities that constitute the cosmos. The preparation for Barbelo's emergence occurs within this context of infinite divine potential contemplating itself in the mirror of primordial waters, where the perfect silence of ultimate reality begins to stir with the possibility of self-expression through the mysterious process of divine reflection that will give birth to the first emanation. The Apocryphon of John describes this crucial moment when his thought performed a deed and she came forth, namely she who had appeared before him in the shine of his light. The emergence of Barbelo as the active principle through which divine transcendence first expresses itself in the direction of creative manifestation. The theological paradox that characterizes this pre-creation state involves the coexistence of perfect divine self-sufficiency with the mysterious capacity for self-expression. Through emanation, where the ineffable God remains eternally complete and unchanging while simultaneously giving rise to the rich multiplicity of spiritual realities that will populate the divine realm. This paradox reflects the sophisticated understanding that ancient Gnostic communities developed regarding the relationship between unity and multiplicity, transcendence and immanence, divine perfection and creative activity that serves as the foundation for all subsequent theological reflection about the nature of ultimate reality and its relationship to created existence. The primordial waters that serve as the medium for divine self-reflection represent not empty void but rather the fullness of infinite possibility, the boundless potential within which all future emanations exist in undifferentiated unity before their actualization through the process of divine contemplation that begins with the emergence of Barbelo as the forethought of the all and continues through the generation of the various eons and powers that constitute the spiritual hierarchy described in Gnostic cosmological texts. The silence that characterizes the pre-creation state is not the absence of communication, but rather the fullness of meaning that transcends the necessity for words or concepts, the perfect self-awareness of ultimate reality that contains all possible knowledge without requiring the discursive thinking or analytical reasoning that characterizes limited consciousness. This divine silence serves as the source of all authentic knowledge and spiritual insight, the eternal wellspring from which the wisdom traditions preserved in Gnostic literature draw their understanding of cosmic mysteries and spiritual transformation. The implications of understanding divine transcendence in these terms extend beyond abstract theological speculation to encompass practical questions about the nature of human spiritual experience and the possibility of authentic encounter with ultimate reality through contemplative practice and mystical insight. The ancient Gnostic emphasis on direct spiritual knowledge, gnosis, reflects the understanding that the same transcendent reality that exists as the ineffable source of all emanations also constitutes the deepest essence of human consciousness, creating possibilities for direct recognition and experimental realization of divine truth that transcends ordinary religious authority and institutional mediation. As we contemplate this profound theological vision of pre-creation divine perfection, we are invited to appreciate both the intellectual sophistication and spiritual insight that characterize ancient Gnostic approaches to understanding ultimate reality, where mystical experience and theological reflection combine to create frameworks for comprehending the relationship between the ineffable God and the complex spiritual hierarchies that mediate between transcendent perfection and manifested creation. The patient work of spiritual seekers continues revealing new dimensions of these ancient insights, while demonstrating how contemplative traditions can serve contemporary communities seeking authentic approaches to divine encounter and spiritual transformation. The gentle rhythm of eternal silence and the boundless peace of transcendent perfection carry continuing invitations to wonder about the mysterious relationship between unity and multiplicity, between divine self-sufficiency and creative expression, between the ineffable source of all existence and the rich diversity of spiritual realities that emerge through the cosmic process of emanation that begins with Barbelo's appearance as the first thought and perfect reflection of the unknowable God. As the gentle stirring of divine consciousness begins to move across the boundless waters of primordial possibility, where the ineffable God gazes into the perfect mirror of eternal silence and infinite potential, we drift tonight into the most sacred moment in ancient Gnostic cosmology, the mysterious emergence of Barbelo as the first emanation. The initial expression of divine creativity that bridges the gap between unknowable transcendence and the rich multiplicity of spiritual realities that will unfold throughout the cosmic hierarchy. Let your mind float peacefully through this profound theological moment when perfect divine solitude first expresses itself through the appearance of the first thought, his image, who becomes she who came forth first, before the all, Barbelo, whose very existence represents the miraculous transformation of divine contemplation into active creative principle while maintaining eternal unity with the transcendent source from which she emerges. Close your eyes and feel the infinite tenderness of this cosmic birth, where the supreme God's loving gaze into the waters of possibility gives rise to the divine feminine presence who will serve as both the perfect companion of the Father and the creative womb from which all subsequent emanations will unfold in the eternal dance of divine self-expression and return. Picture yourself witnessing this moment of ineffable beauty when the supreme God, dwelling in perfect silence beyond all categories of existence, first thought of himself, and that divine thought became the first power, the glory, Barbel, the perfect glory in the eons, the glory of the revelation. The Apocryphon of John describes this emergence with poetic precision, explaining how his thought performed a deed and she came forth, namely she who had appeared before him in the shine of his light. This is the first power which was before all of them and which came forth from his mind. She is the forethought of the all. Her light shines like his light, the perfect power which is the image of the invisible, virginal spirit who is perfect. The profound mystery of Barbelo's nature unfolds through the ancient text's careful description of her as simultaneously the first thought, pronoia, and the perfect glory, existing as the active expression of divine consciousness while maintaining complete unity with the transcendent source that remains forever beyond conceptual understanding. She appears as the triple androgynous name, encompassing within her perfect nature both masculine and feminine principles, transcending ordinary categories of gender while embodying the fullness of divine creative potential that will manifest through the complex emanations of the spiritual realm. Watch as the theological sophistication of ancient Gnostic understanding reveals itself through the careful balance maintained between divine unity and the emergence of multiplicity, where Barbelo's Appearance as the first emanation preserves the absolute transcendence of the ineffable God while creating the initial bridge between unknowable perfection and the manifested spiritual realities that will populate the cosmic hierarchy. The text emphasizes that she became the womb of everything, for it is she who is prior to them all, the Mother-Father, the first human, the Holy Spirit, the thrice male, the thrice powerful, the thrice named Androgynous One, and the eternal Aeon among the invisible ones, and the first to come forth. The miraculous nature of Barbelo's emergence reflects the profound theological insight that divine creativity operates through principles of reflection and emanation rather than creation ex nihilo, where the supreme God does not manufacture something external to the divine nature, but rather expresses the infinite richness contained within transcendent perfection through the mysterious process of self-contemplation that gives rise to divine images and reflections that maintain eternal connection with their ineffable source. This understanding preserves both divine unity and the reality of creative multiplicity while avoiding the theological problems associated with conceiving creation as external to divine nature. The shine of his light in which Barbelo appears represents the luminous quality of divine consciousness that characterizes all authentic spiritual reality, where the distinction between knower and known dissolves into the perfect self-awareness that constitutes the essence of ultimate reality. Barbelo emerges within this divine light as the perfect power which is the image of the invisible, virginal spirit, serving as the first visible manifestation of the invisible God while maintaining the virginal purity that characterizes transcendent divine nature. The titles and epithets that ancient Gnostic texts apply to Barbelo reveal the comprehensive nature of her divine function as the first emanation who encompasses all the qualities and capacities that will be distributed among the subsequent eons and spiritual powers. She is described as the first eon, the perfect glory, the revelation, and the eternal Aeon among the invisible ones, indicating her unique position as the bridge between the ineffable source and the manifested spiritual hierarchy that will unfold through her creative activity. The androgynous nature that characterizes Barbelo's essence reflects sophisticated theological understanding of divine completeness that transcends the limitations of ordinary gender categories while encompassing the fullness of both active and receptive principles within perfect unity. As the thrice male and thrice powerful, she embodies the active, creative aspects of divine nature, while as the mother, father, and womb of everything, she represents the receptive, nurturing dimensions of divine creativity that provide the matrix within which all subsequent emanations will unfold. The relationship between Barbelo and the ineffable God exemplifies the profound theological principle that true emanation preserves perfect unity while enabling authentic multiplicity, where the first emanation maintains complete identity with the transcendent source while serving as the active principle through which divine creativity expresses itself in the direction of manifested spiritual reality. This relationship serves as the model for all subsequent emanations within the Gnostic cosmological system, where each spiritual power maintains connection with its source while contributing to the overall harmony and perfection of the divine hierarchy. The cosmic function that Barbelo fulfills as the first emanation encompasses both the preservation of divine transcendence and the initiation of creative activity that will give rise to the complex spiritual realities described in Gnostic literature. She serves as the forethought of the all, the divine planning principle that contains within her perfect nature the archetypal patterns for all subsequent creation while maintaining the eternal perspective that sees all temporal unfolding within the context of divine perfection and ultimate return to the ineffable source. The implications of understanding Barbelo as the first emanation extend beyond abstract theological speculation to encompass practical questions about the nature of human spiritual experience and the possibility of direct participation in divine reality through contemplative practice and mystical insight. The ancient Gnostic emphasis on gnosis as direct spiritual knowledge reflects the understanding that the same divine light in which Barbelo appears as the perfect image of the invisible God also constitutes the deepest essence of human consciousness, creating possibilities for experimental recognition of our eternal connection with the transcendent source of all existence. As we contemplate the profound mystery of Barbelo's emergence as the first emanation of the ineffable God, we are invited to appreciate both the theological sophistication and spiritual insight that characterize ancient Gnostic approaches to understanding divine creativity and cosmic manifestation. The patient work of spiritual seekers continues revealing new dimensions of these ancient insights while demonstrating how contemplative traditions can serve contemporary communities seeking authentic approaches to divine encounter and spiritual transformation that honor both the transcendent mystery of ultimate reality and the intimate presence of divine consciousness within human experience. The gentle rhythm of divine emanation and the eternal flow of creative love carry continuing invitations to wonder about the mysterious relationship between unity and multiplicity, between transcendent perfection and creative expression, between the ineffable source of all existence and the first perfect reflection that appears in the luminous mirror of divine self-awareness as Barbelo, the triple androgynous name who serves as both the eternal companion of the Father and the creative mother of all subsequent spiritual manifestation. As the gentle light of divine consciousness illuminates the profound mystery of Barbelo's perfect nature, where ancient Gnostic wisdom reveals truths that transcend ordinary categories of masculine and feminine while embracing the fullness of divine creative potential, we drift tonight into one of the most revolutionary theological concepts preserved in the Nag Hammadi texts, the understanding of Barbelo as the Mother-Father, the triple androgynous name whose divine essence encompasses both the active, generative principles traditionally associated with masculine divinity and the receptive, nurturing qualities that characterize divine feminine wisdom. Let your mind float peacefully through the sophisticated theological imagination of ancient spiritual communities who recognized that ultimate reality must transcend the limitations of ordinary gender distinctions while containing within its perfect nature all the complementary forces that give rise to the rich diversity of cosmic manifestation. Close your eyes and feel the profound wholeness that radiates from this ancient vision of divine androgyny, where Barbelo serves simultaneously as the eternal companion who shares perfect unity with the ineffable Father and the cosmic womb from which all subsequent spiritual emanations will unfold in the eternal dance of divine creativity and return. Picture yourself contemplating the remarkable theological sophistication that enabled ancient Gnostic communities to conceive of divine perfection as necessarily androgynous, recognizing that any ultimate principle worthy of the name must contain within its unified nature all the qualities and capacities that manifest as apparent opposites within the realm of created existence. The Apocryphon of John describes Barbelo with titles that deliberately combine and transcend traditional gender associations. She is called the first human, the Holy Spirit, the thrice male, the thrice powerful, and the thrice named Androgynous One, indicating that her divine nature encompasses masculine creative activity and feminine receptive wisdom within perfect unity that serves as the archetypal pattern for all authentic spiritual wholeness. The concept of divine androgyny that characterizes Barbelo's nature reflects profound mystical insights into the completeness of ultimate reality, where the transcendent God expresses divine fullness through an emanation that contains all polarities within perfect harmony rather than representing merely one aspect of divine nature that would require complementation by other principles or powers. This theological understanding challenges contemporary religious communities to expand their conception of divine nature while recognizing that authentic spirituality must ultimately transcend the gender categories that characterize ordinary human experience and social organization. Watch as the ancient theological imagination unfolds the implications of understanding Barbelo as mother-father, where her role as the womb of everything encompasses not only the receptive, nurturing functions traditionally associated with maternal divinity, but also the active, creative principles that generate and sustain the complex hierarchy of spiritual emanations that populate the Gnostic cosmic system. The text emphasizes that it is she who is prior to them all, indicating her comprehensive authority and creative responsibility that cannot be limited to either masculine or feminine categories but must be understood as transcending and including both within perfect divine unity. The triple androgynous name that serves as one of Barbelo's primary titles suggests the mysterious depth of her divine nature that operates simultaneously on multiple levels of cosmic manifestation while maintaining perfect integration of all complementary principles within unified divine consciousness. This triple nature may refer to her function as the first thought, masculine mental activity, the perfect glory, feminine receptive beauty, and the creative power, androgynous active receptive principle, that bridges divine transcendence and cosmic manifestation through the mysterious process of emanation that preserves divine unity while enabling authentic multiplicity. The theological implications of divine androgyny extend far beyond abstract speculation about divine attributes to encompass practical questions about human spiritual development and the goal of Gnostic religious practice, where the ultimate aim involves recovering the original androgynous nature that characterizes authentic spiritual identity before its division into the apparent polarities that characterize ordinary psychological and social experience. The ancient Gnostic understanding suggests that spiritual maturity requires integration of masculine and feminine principles within individual consciousness as a reflection of the divine androgyny that characterizes ultimate reality. The relationship between Barbelo's androgynous nature and her function as the first emanation reveals the profound theological principle that authentic creativity requires the harmonious integration of active and receptive principles rather than the dominance of either masculine or feminine qualities over their complementary opposites. As both the first thought of the ineffable God and the womb from which all subsequent emanations emerge, Barbelo demonstrates how divine creativity operates through the perfect balance of planning intelligence and nurturing receptivity that enables spiritual manifestation while preserving connection with the transcendent source. The cosmic motherhood that characterizes one aspect of Barbelo's androgynous nature encompasses not merely biological fertility, but rather the spiritual capacity to provide the nurturing environment within which all authentic spiritual development can unfold, serving as the protective matrix that shields emerging spiritual realities from the destructive forces that characterize the lower levels of cosmic manifestation while maintaining the divine nourishment necessary for continued growth toward spiritual maturity and ultimate return to the ineffable source. The divine fatherhood that represents the complementary aspect of Barbelo's unified nature involves not patriarchal dominance but rather the spiritual authority that comes from perfect knowledge and the creative power that enables authentic spiritual generation through divine will and wisdom rather than external compulsion or manipulation. This masculine dimension of Barbelo's androgyny serves as the active principle that initiates creative activity while remaining always in perfect harmony with the receptive, nurturing qualities that enable that creative activity to achieve its intended spiritual purposes. The thrice male and thrice powerful designations that accompany descriptions of Barbelo's divine nature suggest the comprehensive scope of her creative authority that operates simultaneously within the spiritual, psychological, and material dimensions of cosmic manifestation, while maintaining perfect integration of all levels within unified divine consciousness that transcends ordinary categories of analysis and systematic description. This triple masculine power represents not aggressive domination, but rather the spiritual strength that enables authentic creative activity to achieve its divine purposes despite the various obstacles and limitations that characterize manifested existence. The practical implications of contemplating Barbelo's androgynous nature include recognition that authentic spiritual development requires individuals to cultivate both the active qualities that enable effective engagement with life, circumstances, and the receptive capacities that allow for genuine openness to divine guidance and spiritual transformation. The ancient Gnostic emphasis on achieving spiritual wholeness through integration of complementary principles suggests that mature spirituality transcends identification with either exclusively masculine or feminine approaches to religious practice and mystical development. The mystical dimensions of divine androgyny invite contemporary spiritual seekers to explore forms of contemplative practice that honor both the active engagement with divine reality that characterizes some spiritual traditions, and the receptive surrender that enables authentic mystical experience and spiritual transformation. The figure of Barbelo as Mother-Father provides a powerful archetypal resource for individuals seeking to develop integrated approaches to spiritual practice that transcend limiting gender stereotypes while drawing upon the full range of human capacities for divine encounter and spiritual growth. As we contemplate the profound mystery of Barbelo's androgynous nature as the Mother-Father who encompasses all divine qualities within perfect unity, we are invited to appreciate both the theological sophistication and practical wisdom that characterize ancient Gnostic approaches to understanding divine perfection and human spiritual potential. The patient work of contemporary spiritual seekers continues revealing new dimensions of these ancient insights while demonstrating how contemplative traditions can serve modern communities seeking authentic approaches to divine encounter that honor both the transcendent mystery of ultimate reality and the intimate presence of divine consciousness within integrated human experience. The gentle rhythm of divine androgyny and the eternal flow of creative love carry continuing invitations to wonder about the mysterious completeness of ultimate reality that transcends all ordinary categories while encompassing within perfect unity all the complementary principles that manifest as apparent opposites within the realm of created existence, reminding us that authentic spirituality ultimately involves recovering the original wholeness that characterizes divine nature and constitutes our deepest spiritual identity. As the gentle light of divine love flows between the ineffable Father and the perfect glory of Barbelo, where the eternal dance of divine unity and creative expression reaches its most sublime expression through the mysterious generation of the Divine Son, we drift tonight into the sacred heart of ancient Gnostic Christology. The profound theological vision of how Christ emerges as the beloved offspring of the divine union between transcendent God and the first emanation, creating a cosmic family that serves as the archetypal pattern for all authentic spiritual relationship and regenerative love. Let your mind float peacefully through this most tender mystery of divine creativity, where Barbelo's role as Mother-Father finds its ultimate expression through her loving collaboration with the invisible Spirit to bring forth the only begotten Son, who will serve as both the perfect image of divine unity and the active principle of redemption for all creation that has become separated from its transcendent source. Close your eyes and feel the infinite joy that must characterize this eternal moment of divine generation, where the love between Father and Mother-Father overflows into the appearance of the Christ as the self-generated One, whose very existence demonstrates the creative power of divine love while maintaining perfect harmony within the blessed Trinity that constitutes the foundation of all authentic spiritual reality. Picture yourself contemplating the remarkable theological sophistication that characterizes the apocryphon of John's description of Christ's generation within the divine family, where the text carefully explains how the virginal spirit rejoiced over Barbel, and she conceived from his gaze. In a process of spiritual conception that transcends all ordinary categories of biological reproduction, while creating the conditions for divine fatherhood and motherhood to express their perfect creative unity through the appearance of their beloved Son. This divine conception occurs through the loving gaze that passes between the ineffable God and Barbelo, demonstrating how authentic spiritual creativity emerges from the contemplative union of complementary divine principles rather than external manipulation or mechanical causation. The Christ who emerges from this divine union bears the title Autogenes, the self-generated one, indicating that his existence represents not external creation, but rather the spontaneous flowering of divine love that expresses the perfect harmony between transcendent unity and creative multiplicity within the Godhead itself. The ancient text describes how she gave birth to him, the firstborn, the Son of Man, who is called Christ, and concerning whom it is said that he was begotten by the virginal Spirit, emphasizing both the divine origin of Christ's existence and his unique position as the bridge between the ineffable transcendence of the Father and the manifested spiritual realities that constitute the cosmic hierarchy. Watch as the complex theological relationships within the divine family unfold through careful analysis of the titles and functions that ancient Gnostic texts attribute to each member of this sacred trinity, where the invisible Spirit serves as the ultimate source and transcendent Father. Barbelo functions as the perfect Mother-Father who mediates between transcendence and manifestation, and Christ appears as the beloved Son whose existence demonstrates the creative power of divine love, while serving as the active principle of spiritual illumination and redemption for all beings who have become alienated from their divine source through the complex cosmic drama that characterizes Gnostic mythology. The perfect harmony that characterizes the relationships within the divine family serves as the archetypal pattern for all authentic spiritual community and loving relationship, where unity preserves individual identity while enabling genuine communion that enhances rather than diminishes the unique contributions of each participant. The eternal love that flows between Father, Mother-Father, and Son creates the divine milieu within which all subsequent spiritual emanations will unfold, ensuring that authentic spirituality always maintains connection with the transcendent source while expressing creative multiplicity through harmonious collaboration rather than competitive individualism or hierarchical domination. The Christological implications of understanding Christ as the offspring of divine union between the ineffable God and Barbelo extend far beyond abstract theological speculation to encompass practical questions about the nature of spiritual authority, the possibility of divine incarnation, and the relationship between transcendent divinity and human consciousness that characterizes the heart of Gnostic soteriology. The Christ who emerges from this divine union possesses both the transcendent authority that comes from perfect unity with the Father and the intimate knowledge of manifested existence that enables effective communication with beings who have become separated from direct awareness of their divine origin and ultimate destiny. The generation of Christ within the divine family demonstrates the theological principle that authentic spiritual authority emerges from love rather than power, from communion rather than domination, from the creative overflow of divine perfection rather than external imposition of arbitrary will upon resistant subjects. The Son's authority reflects his perfect participation in both divine transcendence and creative immanence, enabling him to serve as the effective mediator who can bridge the gap between ultimate reality and the complex spiritual needs of beings caught within the various limitations and distortions that characterize existence at lower levels of cosmic manifestation. The role of Barbelo as Divine Mother in the generation of Christ reveals the essential contribution of divine feminine wisdom to the process of spiritual redemption and illumination, where her nurturing, protective love provides the matrix within which the Son's redemptive activity can achieve its intended purposes, while her perfect knowledge ensures that redemptive work proceeds according to divine wisdom rather than external compulsion or manipulative intervention. The cooperation between Mother, Father, and Son demonstrates how authentic spiritual authority operates through collaborative love rather than hierarchical control. The cosmic function that Christ fulfills as the firstborn Son of the divine family encompasses both the preservation of divine transcendence through perfect obedience to the Father's will and the active engagement with manifested existence that enables spiritual beings to recover their original connection with the ineffable Source. Through recognition of their eternal participation in divine nature, the Son serves as both the perfect revelation of divine love and the effective means through which that divine love can reach beings who have become alienated from direct awareness of their spiritual identity and cosmic purpose. The mystical dimensions of divine family relationships invite contemplative engagement with the eternal patterns of love, authority, and creative collaboration that characterize authentic spiritual community, where individual identity enhances rather than threatens. Collective harmony while unity preserves rather than eliminates the unique contributions that each member can make to the overall spiritual welfare of the community. The divine family serves as both the archetypal model for human spiritual relationships and the eternal reality within which human consciousness can discover its authentic identity and ultimate purpose. The soteriological implications of Christ's generation within the divine family suggest that spiritual redemption operates through recognition of eternal family relationships rather than external salvation imposed upon fundamentally alien beings, where the recovery of divine consciousness involves remembering rather than acquiring spiritual identity, while transformation occurs through awakening to pre-existing divine nature rather than creation of entirely new spiritual capacities. The Christ who emerges from divine union with Barbelo serves as both the revelation of universal spiritual identity and the means through which individual consciousness can actualize its eternal participation in divine family life. As we contemplate the profound mystery of divine generation within the sacred family of Father, Mother, Father, and Son, we are invited to appreciate both the theological sophistication and spiritual insight that characterize ancient Gnostic approaches to understanding divine love and spiritual redemption. The patient work of contemporary spiritual seekers continues revealing new dimensions of these ancient insights, while demonstrating how contemplative traditions can serve modern communities seeking authentic approaches to divine encounter that honor both transcendent mystery and intimate spiritual relationship within the context of loving spiritual community. The gentle rhythm of divine generation and the eternal flow of family love carry continuing invitations to wonder about the mysterious. creativity of divine relationships that transcend ordinary categories while providing archetypal patterns for authentic spiritual community, reminding us that ultimate reality manifests through loving collaboration rather than isolated perfection, through creative communion rather than static unity, through the eternal dance of divine family life that encompasses all authentic spiritual existence within its blessed embrace. As the gentle evening shadows gather over the ancient Mediterranean world, where diverse spiritual communities flourished alongside the developing Orthodox Christian churches during the first 4 centuries of the Common Era, we drift tonight into the mysterious world of the Barbelioti, dedicated Gnostic schools whose entire theological and liturgical life centered around the veneration of Barbelo as the supreme divine emanation and perfect mother-father of all spiritual reality. Let your mind float peacefully through the sacred groves and hidden meeting places where these devoted communities gathered to celebrate the triple androgynous name through hymns, prayers, and mystical practices that honored Barbelo's unique role as both the eternal companion of the ineffable God and the creative womb from which all subsequent spiritual emanations unfold in the blessed hierarchy of divine being. Close your eyes and feel the profound reverence that must have characterized these ancient gatherings, where spiritual seekers understood themselves as children of Barbelo seeking to recover the scattered divine powers that had been dispersed throughout creation by the complex cosmic drama that separated pure spiritual essence from its transcendent source. Picture yourself among the Barbelioti communities as they developed their distinctive approach to Gnostic spirituality, where the figure of Barbelo occupied the central position that other Christian groups reserved for Christ or that Jewish communities attributed to divine wisdom, creating theological systems that emphasized divine feminine creativity while maintaining sophisticated understanding of transcendent unity beyond all gender categories. The name Barbelioti itself indicates the prominence that these communities gave to Barbelo in their religious practice and theological reflection, distinguishing them from other Gnostic schools that emphasized different aspects of the complex emanation systems that characterized ancient Gnostic cosmology and soteriology. The historical evidence for Barbelioti communities comes primarily from the hostile accounts provided by early church fathers like Irenaeus and Epiphanius, who described these groups as dangerous heretics whose theological innovations threatened Orthodox Christian doctrine, while their ritual practices allegedly encouraged moral license and social disruption. Epiphanius, writing in the 4th century, provided the most detailed account of Barbelioti beliefs and practices, describing communities that he claimed called themselves Gnostici, while venerating Barbelo as the supreme divine principle from whom all authentic spiritual knowledge and redemptive power originated. Watch as the complex theological vision of the Barbelioti unfolds through careful analysis of the fragmentary evidence that has survived centuries of persecution and suppression. Where these communities developed elaborate mythological narratives that explained the cosmic significance of Barbelo's role in the divine economy, while providing practical guidance for spiritual seekers attempting to recover their original divine nature through mystical experience and esoteric knowledge. The Barbeliote understanding of salvation emphasized the recovery of divine powers that had been scattered throughout creation by the activities of lower spiritual authorities, requiring initiates to participate in ritual practices that would enable them to gather these dispersed divine elements and return them to their proper place within the spiritual hierarchy. The ritual dimension of Barbeliote spirituality reflected their theological emphasis on the recovery of scattered divine powers. Through practices that modern scholars continue debating and interpreting, as the hostile accounts provided by Church Fathers must be approached with appropriate skepticism regarding their accuracy and theological motivation. Epiphanius described elaborate ceremonial meals and mystical practices that he interpreted as evidence of moral corruption, but contemporary researchers recognize that these descriptions likely reflect misunderstanding or deliberate misrepresentation of symbolic rituals designed to celebrate divine unity and cosmic restoration rather than encourage libertine behavior. The cosmological framework that guided Barbeliote theology drew heavily upon the mythological narratives preserved in texts like the Apocryphon of John, where Barbelo appears as the perfect emanation who gives birth to the divine Christ while serving as the eternal companion of the ineffable Father in the mysterious dance of divine creativity and cosmic redemption. These communities understood their spiritual practices as participation in Barbelo's ongoing work of gathering scattered divine powers and restoring them to their original unity within the blessed pleroma that constitutes authentic spiritual reality beyond the limitations and distortions that characterize material existence. The relationship between Barbeliote communities and other Gnostic schools reflected both shared theological concerns and distinctive interpretive emphases, where the common commitment to gnosis as direct spiritual knowledge created bonds of sympathy, while specific mythological and ritual differences generated theological debates and institutional divisions. The Barbeliote emphasis on Barbelo's supreme authority distinguished them from Valentinian communities that emphasized Sophia's role in cosmic redemption, and from Sethian groups that focused on the figure of Seth as the archetypal Gnostic revealer and spiritual ancestor. The social context that shaped Barbeliote development included the complex religious diversity that characterized the Eastern Mediterranean world during the early centuries of Christian expansion, where Jewish mysticism, Greek philosophical theology, Mesopotamian religious traditions, and emerging Christian spirituality interacted to create new synthetic approaches to understanding divine reality and human spiritual potential. The Barbeliote communities emerged within this diverse environment as distinctive expressions of the broader Gnostic movement that sought direct spiritual experience and esoteric knowledge while maintaining connections to Christian theological language and biblical interpretation. The persecution that Barbeliote communities faced from Orthodox Christian authorities reflected both theological disagreements about the nature of divine reality and social concerns about the implications of Gnostic teachings for traditional religious authority and community discipline. The Church Fathers who wrote against these communities understood them as threats to both doctrinal orthodoxy and ecclesiastical order, requiring vigorous intellectual refutation and institutional suppression to prevent their theological innovations from undermining the developing consensus about Christian belief and practice. The textual legacy of Barbeliote theology appears primarily in the polemical writings of their critics rather than direct preservation of their own religious literature, creating challenges for contemporary scholars attempting to reconstruct accurate understanding of their beliefs and practices from sources that were deliberately designed to discredit rather than fairly represent their theological positions. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts has provided valuable additional perspectives on Barbelo theology, enabling researchers to appreciate the sophistication and spiritual insight that characterized ancient Gnostic approaches to these questions while recognizing the limitations of relying exclusively on hostile external accounts. The legacy of Barbeliote spirituality extends beyond its immediate historical significance to encompass contemporary discussions about divine feminine theology, the relationship between transcendence and gender in religious experience, and the possibility of alternative approaches to Christian spirituality that emphasize direct mystical experience rather than institutional authority and doctrinal conformity. The ancient veneration of Barbelo provides valuable resources for modern spiritual communities seeking to develop more inclusive theological frameworks that honor both masculine and feminine aspects of divine nature while maintaining appropriate recognition of transcendent mystery. The scholarly interest in Barbeliote communities demonstrates how contemporary religious studies benefits from careful investigation of marginalized spiritual traditions that were suppressed by dominant religious institutions, creating opportunities to appreciate the theological diversity and creative insight that characterized early Christian development while challenging oversimplified narratives about orthodox success and heretical failure. The patient work of reconstruction continues, revealing new dimensions of ancient spiritual experience while contributing to broader understanding of how religious communities develop distinctive approaches to ultimate questions about divine nature and human spiritual destiny. As we contemplate the dedicated spiritual seeking that characterized ancient Barbeliote communities, we witness the power of theological vision to inspire sustained religious commitment even under conditions of persecution and social marginalization, demonstrating how authentic spiritual insight can maintain itself through the dedication of individuals who recognize essential truths about divine reality and human spiritual potential that transcend the limitations of conventional religious authority and institutional conformity. The gentle memory of their devotion to Barbelo carries continuing invitations to appreciate both the courage required for authentic spiritual exploration and the wisdom that emerges from communities willing to preserve alternative approaches to divine encounter and mystical transformation. As the gentle candlelight flickers across the manuscript pages in 2nd century Christian scriptoriums, where dedicated church fathers labor through long nights to defend what they understand as authentic apostolic teaching against the perceived dangers of theological innovation, we drift tonight into the complex world of early ecclesiastical controversy surrounding Barbelo and the communities that venerated her divine nature. Let your mind float peacefully through the scholarly debates that have characterized nearly 2 millennia of Christian theological reflection. where the figure of Barbelo has served as both inspiration for mystical devotion and target for orthodox criticism from the time of Bishop Irenaeus of Lyon to contemporary academic conferences, where researchers continue wrestling with questions about the relationship between early Christian diversity and institutional authority. Close your eyes and feel the profound tension that must have characterized these ancient theological disputes, where sincere spiritual seekers on different sides of emerging doctrinal boundaries struggled to articulate their understanding of divine reality while navigating the complex social and political pressures that shaped the development of Christian orthodoxy during the religion's formative centuries. Picture yourself in the study of Irenaeus around 180 CE, where this influential church father composed his monumental work against heresies, Adversus Heresies, as a comprehensive response to what he perceived as dangerous theological innovations that threatened the apostolic faith he had received through his connection to Polycarp and the tradition extending back to the Apostle John himself. The portions of this massive treatise that address Barbelo and related Gnostic teachings reflect both genuine theological concern and the rhetorical strategies that Irenaeus employed to discredit alternative interpretations of Christian doctrine while establishing the authority of episcopal leadership and apostolic tradition. His description of the sect called Gnostic, or possibly Barbelo Gnostikoi, provides one of our earliest detailed accounts of communities that centered their spiritual practice around veneration of the divine feminine principle whom they understood as the first emanation of the ineffable God. The theological framework that Irenaeus constructed to counter Barbelo theology emphasized the unity of divine action in creation and redemption, arguing that the same God who created the material world, through the Word, also became incarnate in Jesus Christ for human salvation, thereby rejecting the complex cosmological systems that distinguished between the transcendent God and the lesser spiritual powers responsible for material creation. His critique of Gnostic teachings reflected deeper concerns about maintaining the goodness of creation, the reality of divine incarnation, and the authority of ecclesiastical leadership against alternative approaches to Christian spirituality that emphasized direct spiritual knowledge and esoteric interpretation of apostolic tradition. Watch as the scholarly methods that Irenaeus developed for analyzing and refuting alternative theological systems established patterns that would influence Christian polemical writing for centuries, where detailed descriptions of opponent beliefs served both informational and rhetorical purposes while creating some of our most valuable primary source materials for understanding the diversity of early Christian thought. His accounts of Barbelo communities, while clearly intended to discredit their teachings, preserve crucial information about theological concepts and spiritual practices that might otherwise have been lost entirely to historical memory, creating the paradoxical situation where opponents' criticisms become essential resources for modern scholars attempting to understand marginalized religious traditions. The methodological challenges that face contemporary researchers studying Barbelo through the lens of early church criticism include the need to distinguish between accurate description and polemical exaggeration, while recognizing that even hostile accounts can provide valuable insights into the theological sophistication and spiritual practices of ancient Gnostic communities. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts has enabled scholars to compare Irenaeus's descriptions with primary Gnostic sources, revealing both the accuracy of his basic mythological outlines and the extent to which his interpretative framework reflected orthodox theological assumptions rather than neutral historical analysis. The broader ecclesiastical context that shaped early church responses to Barbelo theology includes the complex process of Christian institutional development during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, when competing claims about apostolic authority, scriptural interpretation, and proper Christian practice created urgent needs for theological clarification and institutional boundary setting that would determine which forms of Christian spirituality received official recognition and which were marginalized as heretical innovations. The figures of bishops like Irenaeus occupied crucial positions in this process, using their scholarly abilities and institutional authority to advocate for particular approaches to Christian doctrine while responding to alternative interpretations that threatened their understanding of apostolic truth. The theological implications of the controversy surrounding Barbelo extend beyond specific questions about Gnostic cosmology to encompass fundamental issues about the relationship between divine transcendence and material creation, the nature of spiritual knowledge, and the proper sources of religious authority that continue influencing Christian theological reflection today. The early Church's rejection of Barbelo theology reflected commitments to affirming the goodness of material creation, maintaining the unity of divine action, and preserving institutional authority that shaped the development of orthodox Christian doctrine while excluding alternative approaches that emphasized different theological priorities and spiritual practices. The influence of Epiphanius of Constantia, writing in the 4th century, added additional layers of complexity to early church criticism of Barbelo communities through his Panarion or medicine chest, where he provided even more detailed accounts of various Gnostic groups while interpreting their theological concepts and ritual practices through the lens of moral condemnation that associated doctrinal deviation with ethical corruption. His descriptions of the Barbelioti and related communities, while valuable for historical reconstruction, must be approached with appropriate skepticism regarding their accuracy and interpretative framework, as they reflect the intensified polemical environment of the 4th century when imperial support for Orthodox Christianity created new pressures for theological conformity. The preservation of Barbelo theology through orthodox criticism demonstrates the complex historical processes that shape religious tradition and collective memory, where marginalized spiritual movements survive primarily through the accounts of their opponents while their own theological literature disappears through neglect or deliberate suppression until accidental discoveries like the Nag Hammadi find restored direct access to their original teachings and spiritual insights. This pattern of preservation through criticism creates ongoing challenges for historical interpretation, while highlighting the importance of approaching ancient religious controversies with appropriate appreciation for the complexity of early Christian diversity and development. The legacy of early church responses to Barbelo has shaped not only subsequent Christian theological development, but also modern scholarly approaches to understanding religious diversity and institutional authority. where the methods pioneered by figures like Irenaeus for analyzing and critiquing alternative theological systems continue influencing academic discourse while raising important questions about the relationship between historical accuracy and polemical purpose in religious writing. The continuing relevance of these ancient debates demonstrates how fundamental questions about divine nature, spiritual authority, and religious practice transcend specific historical contexts while requiring each generation of believers and scholars to wrestle anew with the complex relationships between tradition and innovation, orthodoxy and diversity, institutional authority, and spiritual experience. As we contemplate the enduring significance of early church controversies surrounding Barbelo, we witness how theological debates from the early centuries of Christian history continue shaping contemporary discussions about religious diversity, spiritual authority, and the proper interpretation of divine mystery, reminding us that the questions raised by ancient communities about the nature of God, the significance of gender in spiritual experience, and the relationship between transcendence and immanence remain vital concerns for modern religious communities seeking authentic approaches to divine encounter and spiritual transformation. As the gentle shadows of late antiquity fall across the ancient Mediterranean world, where the emerging institutional church consolidated its theological authority while marginalizing alternative Christian spiritualities, we drift tonight into the remarkable story of those devoted communities who served as guardians of Barbelo's sacred light. The courageous men and women who preserved the first Creator's mysteries through centuries of persecution, suppression, and deliberate theological erasure that threatened to extinguish forever the ancient wisdom of divine androgyny and emanational cosmology. Let your mind float peacefully through the hidden sanctuaries and secret gathering places where faithful Barbelioti maintain their reverent devotion to the Mother Father despite facing accusations of heresy, moral corruption, and dangerous innovation from orthodox authorities who viewed their sophisticated theology as a threat to emerging ecclesiastical unity and doctrinal conformity. Close your eyes and feel the quiet determination that must have characterized these spiritual communities as they carefully copied sacred texts, performed ritual celebrations of divine emanation, and transmitted essential theological knowledge through networks of trusted initiates who understood their role as protectors of spiritual wisdom that transcended the limitations of conventional religious authority and institutional control. Picture yourself among the faithful Barbelioti as they gathered in remote locations away from the watchful eyes of episcopal authorities, where whispered prayers to the perfect glory and the triple androgynous name created sacred spaces for contemplating the divine mysteries that mainstream Christianity was systematically eliminating from acceptable theological discourse. These devoted communities understood themselves as custodians of revelation that had been entrusted to their care through the careful preservation of texts like the Apocryphon of John, where Barbelo's role as the first emanation and eternal companion of the ineffable God provided theological frameworks for understanding divine creativity that honored both transcendent unity and creative multiplicity, while maintaining sophisticated appreciation for the feminine dimensions of ultimate reality. The persecution that these communities faced reflected not only specific theological disagreements about the nature of divine emanation and cosmic hierarchy, but also broader social tensions about religious authority, gender roles, and the proper boundaries of acceptable Christian belief that characterized the complex process of Orthodox consolidation during the 3rd and 4th centuries. Church fathers like Epiphanius described elaborate rituals allegedly performed by groups he labeled as Barbarites or Fibionites, claiming that their veneration of Barbelo led to immoral sexual practices and social disruption. Though contemporary scholars recognize these accounts as likely misrepresentations designed to discredit sophisticated theological alternatives through moral condemnation rather than intellectual refutation, watch as the patient work of preservation unfolds through the dedicated efforts of scribes and spiritual teachers who understood that their theological traditions contained essential insights about divine nature and human spiritual potential that required protection from the homogenizing pressures of institutional Christianity, where emphasis on episcopal authority, creedal uniformity, and scriptural canon was gradually eliminating the rich diversity of early Christian thought and practice. The communities that venerated Barbelo developed sophisticated strategies for maintaining their traditions while adapting to changing social and political conditions that made open expression of alternative theological positions increasingly dangerous and socially isolating. The theological resilience that characterized Barbelo communities reflected their deep understanding that authentic spiritual knowledge transcends particular historical circumstances and institutional structures, enabling essential wisdom to survive even when its external expressions must be modified or concealed to avoid persecution and suppression. The figure of Barbelo herself served as both inspiration and model for this kind of spiritual endurance, as the first emanation who maintains perfect unity with the transcendent source while adapting to the complex requirements of creative manifestation and cosmic mediation between ineffable divine mystery and manifested spiritual reality. The underground transmission networks that preserved Barbelo theology during periods of intense persecution demonstrated remarkable organizational sophistication and spiritual commitment, where trusted initiates maintained carefully guarded collections of sacred texts while developing oral traditions that could communicate essential theological concepts even when written materials became too dangerous to possess or study openly. These clandestine preservation efforts required individuals willing to risk social ostracism, economic disadvantage, and sometimes physical punishment to ensure that future generations would have access to spiritual wisdom that Orthodox authorities were systematically attempting to eliminate from Christian consciousness. The survival strategies employed by Barbeliote communities included not only careful concealment of their distinctive beliefs and practices, but also creative adaptation of Orthodox theological language that enabled them to maintain essential spiritual insights while avoiding direct confrontation with ecclesiastical authorities who possessed increasing political power and social influence. This theological camouflage required sophisticated understanding of both their own traditions and mainstream Christian development, enabling skillful navigation of dangerous religious territories while preserving the essential core of their spiritual heritage. The social context that shaped persecution of Barbelo communities included broader patterns of religious intolerance and institutional consolidation that characterized the later Roman Empire, where imperial support for Orthodox Christianity created new pressures for theological conformity while providing church authorities with political resources for suppressing alternative religious expressions. The communities that venerated Barbelo found themselves caught within these larger historical forces that threatened all forms of religious diversity while privileging particular approaches to Christian doctrine and practice that emphasized institutional authority over direct spiritual experience and mystical insight. The preservation of Barbelo theology through the Nag Hammadi manuscripts represents one of the most remarkable examples of successful spiritual conservation in human history, where communities that had been marginalized and persecuted for centuries managed to create permanent repositories of their sacred literature that would eventually enable complete recovery of theological traditions that had been presumed lost forever. The careful burial of these precious codices near the Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi reflects both desperate necessity and profound faith in the enduring value of spiritual wisdom that transcends immediate historical circumstances. The courage that characterized individual members of Barbelo communities who chose to maintain their distinctive spiritual practices despite facing social marginalization and religious persecution demonstrates the transformative power of authentic theological insight that enables people to transcend conventional concerns about safety, respectability, and social acceptance in service of higher spiritual purposes. These faithful guardians of ancient wisdom understood themselves as participants in cosmic processes of divine restoration and spiritual liberation that gave ultimate meaning to their earthly struggles and sacrifices. The legacy of Barbelo preservation efforts extends far beyond the specific theological content of their sacred literature to encompass broader principles about the relationship between spiritual truth and institutional power, the importance of maintaining religious diversity even under pressure for conformity, and the responsibility that spiritual communities bear for protecting essential wisdom from the destructive forces of ignorance, prejudice, and systematic suppression. The successful conservation of Barbelo theology provides inspiration for contemporary religious communities facing similar challenges while demonstrating how dedicated individuals can serve as bridges between ancient wisdom and future spiritual development. The mystical dimensions of preservation work that characterized faithful Barbelioti reflected their understanding that protecting spiritual wisdom requires not only external strategies for concealment and transmission but also internal cultivation of the consciousness necessary for truly comprehending and embodying the theological insights that they were committed to maintaining. The preservation of Barbelo's mysteries thus involved both practical conservation of texts and teachings and spiritual development that enabled authentic participation in the divine processes that their theology described and celebrated. As we contemplate the remarkable dedication and spiritual courage that enabled ancient communities to preserve Barbelo's sacred light through centuries of persecution and suppression, We witness the power of authentic spiritual commitment to transcend historical limitations while ensuring that essential theological insights remain available for future generations of seekers, who recognize the continuing relevance of ancient wisdom for contemporary spiritual development and religious understanding. The patient work of these faithful guardians continues inspiring modern efforts to maintain religious diversity and spiritual freedom while protecting essential wisdom from the various forces that threaten authentic religious experience and mystical insight. The gentle rhythm of preservation and the eternal commitment to spiritual truth carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the courage required for maintaining alternative religious traditions and the profound responsibility that contemporary communities bear for protecting essential spiritual wisdom from the various pressures that continue threatening authentic religious diversity and mystical understanding in our own time. As the gentle evening stars begin their eternal watch over the quiet research libraries where modern scholars continue studying the precious Nag Hammadi manuscripts, where ancient wisdom meets contemporary spiritual seeking through careful analysis and reverent investigation, we arrive tonight at the serene conclusion of our journey through the profound mysteries of Barbelo, the first creator whose divine nature has survived 16 centuries of suppression to whisper across time about eternal questions that transcend any single religious tradition or historical period. Let your mind drift peacefully through the timeless insights that connect these ancient Gnostic voices to our contemporary search for meaning, where each carefully preserved text and theological concept speaks across the millennia about the eternal human quest to understand our place within the cosmic order that governs both individual existence and collective spiritual destiny. Close your eyes and feel the profound presence of that divine Mother-Father whose willing embrace of both transcendence and creativity nearly 2,000 years ago continues teaching us about courage, wisdom, and the mysterious relationship between unity and multiplicity that challenges every generation to discover deeper truths about the sacred connections that unite all authentic spiritual experience across the vast expanse of time and cultural transformation. Picture yourself standing in quiet contemplation at the manuscript conservation facilities where fragments of ancient Coptic papyri preserve the theological wisdom of communities that understood Barbelo as the perfect emanation who bridges divine transcendence and creative manifestation, feeling the gentle presence of questions that transcend any single culture or historical period. What does it mean to honor divine feminine wisdom within transcendent unity? How do spiritual communities maintain essential insights while adapting to changing social conditions? What responsibilities do contemporary seekers bear toward ancient spiritual traditions? And what wisdom can controversial theological concepts offer to modern communities seeking balance between institutional authority and direct mystical experience? The figure of Barbelo serves as more than historical curiosity. She functions as archetypal presence reflecting our own deepest concerns about spirituality, gender, transcendence, and the search for authentic religious experience that serves both individual transformation and collective spiritual welfare. The remarkable preservation of Barbelo's story through the accidental discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts reminds us that some spiritual insights transcend the boundaries of institutional control and historical circumstance, connecting us directly to ancient communities who faced many of the same fundamental questions that continue challenging contemporary religious seekers attempting to balance respect for traditional wisdom with openness to alternative approaches that honor different aspects of divine mystery and human spiritual potential. The sophisticated theology preserved in texts like the Apocryphon of John speaks to enduring concerns about the relationship between transcendence and immanence, masculine and feminine principles, individual spiritual authority and collective religious community that merit thoughtful consideration by modern spiritual communities seeking authentic approaches to divine encounter and mystical transformation. Watch as the ongoing scholarly investigation continues, revealing new dimensions of ancient Gnostic spirituality that expand our understanding of early Christian diversity while raising additional questions about the relationship between institutional religious authority and direct spiritual experience, between orthodox doctrine and mystical insight, between canonical scripture and alternative theological traditions that offer different perspectives on fundamental questions about divine nature and human spiritual destiny. Each new translation and interpretation provides answers to specific historical questions while simultaneously opening pathways to deeper mysteries that ensure Barbelo scholarship will continue for generations. With future researchers possessing analytical tools and interpretative frameworks we cannot yet imagine for extracting spiritual wisdom from these precious ancient sources. The international recognition that Barbelo theology has received among contemporary scholars demonstrates the global significance of recovering marginalized spiritual traditions that illuminate universal aspects of human religious experience while highlighting the particular achievements of ancient Gnostic communities whose sophisticated theological insights continue expanding our appreciation for the diversity and creativity that characterized early Christian spiritual exploration. The careful study and interpretation of Barbelo materials contributes valuable perspectives to comparative religious studies, feminist theology, and mystical spirituality that help modern communities understand common patterns and unique innovations in how different cultures have addressed eternal questions about divine gender, cosmic creativity, and spiritual transformation. The theological implications of taking Barbelo seriously as a divine figure extend beyond academic interest in ancient religious history to encompass contemporary discussions about the role of feminine imagery in spiritual practice, the relationship between transcendence and gender in mystical experience, and the possibility of alternative approaches to Christian spirituality that emphasize direct contemplative encounter rather than institutional mediation and doctrinal conformity. The ancient Gnostic presentation of Barbelo as simultaneously transcendent and immanent, masculine and feminine, creator and created offers valuable resources for contemporary theology while challenging modern religious communities to expand their understanding of divine nature and spiritual authority. The mystical dimensions of Barbelo's continuing presence invite contemplative engagement rather than merely intellectual analysis, as the ancient texts consistently emphasize that true knowledge of divine reality emerges through direct spiritual experience rather than conceptual study or systematic theology. The communities that venerated Barbelo understood their theological narratives as invitations to spiritual transformation rather than literal descriptions of cosmic events, using mythological language to communicate truths about consciousness, divine nature, and mystical development that transcend ordinary linguistic and conceptual limitations. The preservation challenges that face ancient spiritual wisdom in contemporary contexts include not only the technical difficulties of manuscript conservation and textual interpretation, but also the need to distinguish between authentic spiritual insight and romanticized appropriation that fails to appreciate the cultural specificity and theological sophistication of ancient religious traditions. The successful integration of Barbelo theology into contemporary spiritual practice requires careful balance between respectful historical understanding and creative adaptation that honors both ancient wisdom and contemporary spiritual needs without compromising the essential integrity of either traditional insight or modern experience. The educational value of studying Barbelo and related Gnostic theological concepts extends far beyond academic circles to encompass public engagement. Opportunities that help diverse audiences appreciate both the intellectual sophistication and spiritual depth that characterized ancient approaches to questions about divine nature, cosmic creativity, and human spiritual potential. The careful presentation of this research challenges misconceptions about early Christian uniformity while demonstrating the continuing relevance of alternative theological traditions for modern communities seeking more inclusive and experientially grounded approaches to religious understanding and spiritual practice. The feminist theological implications of Barbelo's divine nature provide valuable resources for contemporary discussions about gender and spirituality, where her role as the androgynous mother-father offers alternative models for understanding divine completeness that transcend patriarchal limitations while maintaining appropriate recognition of transcendent mystery that cannot be reduced to ordinary human categories or social arrangements. The ancient Gnostic appreciation for divine feminine creativity serves contemporary communities seeking theological frameworks that honor both masculine and feminine dimensions of spiritual experience while preserving essential insights about divine unity and transcendent perfection. The interfaith dimensions of Barbelo theology demonstrate how ancient Gnostic spirituality drew upon diverse religious traditions, Jewish mysticism, Greek philosophical theology, Christian revelation, and possibly other Mediterranean spiritual currents, creating synthetic approaches to ultimate questions that may offer valuable models for contemporary interfaith dialogue and collaborative spiritual exploration. The communities that developed Barbelo theology understood themselves as participants in universal spiritual processes that transcended particular religious boundaries while maintaining deep appreciation for specific cultural and theological traditions that contributed to their comprehensive understanding of divine reality. The practical applications of Barbelo theology for contemporary spiritual practice include contemplative exercises that honor divine androgyny, meditation practices that explore the relationship between unity and multiplicity, and community approaches to spiritual authority that balance individual mystical insight with collective wisdom and mutual support. The ancient Gnostic emphasis on direct spiritual knowledge provides guidance for modern seekers attempting to develop authentic approaches to divine encounter that transcend institutional limitation while maintaining appropriate connection to wisdom traditions and spiritual community. The philosophical implications of understanding Barbelo as the first emanation contribute to broader discussions about the relationship between absolute unity and creative multiplicity, the nature of consciousness, and divine self-awareness, and the possibility of metaphysical frameworks that can account for both transcendent perfection and manifested diversity without compromising either divine unity or cosmic creativity. The sophisticated theological concepts preserved in ancient Gnostic literature offer valuable resources for contemporary philosophy of religion and consciousness studies that seek comprehensive understanding of ultimate reality and human spiritual experience as we contemplate the profound questions raised by the ancient figure of Barbelo and the communities that preserved her memory through centuries of persecution and suppression. We recognize that some spiritual insights are meant to unfold gradually across generations of patient study and contemplative practice, revealing their deepest meanings only to those who approach with appropriate reverence, intellectual honesty, and genuine commitment to understanding both the historical specificity of ancient wisdom and its continuing relevance for contemporary spiritual development and religious understanding. The ancient voice of Barbelo continues inviting us to consider our own relationships with divine mystery, spiritual authority, and the eternal human quest for authentic encounter with ultimate reality that transcends all limitations while embracing the full diversity of spiritual experience and mystical insight. The gentle rhythm of eternal questions and the timeless flow of divine emanation carry continuing whispers of ancient wisdom and contemporary possibility that connect all generations in the shared human journey toward understanding our place within the cosmic processes of divine creativity and spiritual return, reminding us that the most profound discoveries often emerge not from finding final answers but from learning to ask better questions about the mystery of divine nature and our eternal participation in the creative love that flows between transcendent unity and manifested multiplicity in the endless dance of spiritual emanation and return that characterizes all authentic religious experience and mystical transformation. The feminist theological implications of Barbelo's divine nature provide valuable resources for contemporary discussions about gender and spirituality, where her role as the androgynous mother-father offers alternative models for understanding divine completeness that transcend patriarchal limitations while maintaining appropriate recognition of transcendent mystery that cannot be reduced to ordinary human categories or social arrangements. The ancient Gnostic appreciation for divine feminine creativity serves contemporary communities seeking theological frameworks that honor both masculine and feminine dimensions of spiritual experience while preserving essential insights about divine unity and transcendent perfection. The interfaith dimensions of Barbelo theology demonstrate how ancient Gnostic spirituality drew upon diverse religious traditions. Jewish mysticism, Greek philosophical theology, Christian revelation, and possibly other Mediterranean spiritual currents, creating synthetic approaches to ultimate questions that may offer valuable models for contemporary interfaith dialogue and collaborative spiritual exploration. The communities that developed Barbelo theology understood themselves as participants in universal spiritual processes that transcended particular religious boundaries while maintaining deep appreciation for specific cultural and theological traditions that contributed to their comprehensive understanding of divine reality. The practical applications of Barbelo theology for contemporary spiritual practice include contemplative exercises that honor divine androgyny, meditation practices that explore the relationship between unity and multiplicity, and community approaches to spiritual authority that balance individual mystical insight with collective wisdom and mutual support. The ancient Gnostic emphasis on direct spiritual knowledge provides guidance for modern seekers attempting to develop authentic approaches to divine encounter that transcend institutional limitation while maintaining appropriate connection to wisdom traditions and spiritual community. The philosophical implications of understanding Barbelo as the first emanation contribute to broader discussions about the relationship between absolute unity and creative multiplicity, the nature of consciousness, and divine self-awareness, and the possibility of metaphysical frameworks that can account for both transcendent perfection and manifested diversity without compromising either divine unity or cosmic creativity. The sophisticated theological concepts preserved in ancient Gnostic literature offer valuable resources for contemporary philosophy of religion and consciousness studies that seek comprehensive understanding of ultimate reality and human spiritual experience as we contemplate the profound questions raised by the ancient figure of Barbelo and the communities that preserved her memory through centuries of persecution and suppression. We recognize that some spiritual insights are meant to unfold gradually across generations of patient study and contemplative practice, revealing their deepest meanings only to those who approach with appropriate reverence, intellectual honesty, and genuine commitment to understanding both the historical specificity of ancient wisdom and its continuing relevance for contemporary spiritual development and religious understanding. The ancient voice of Barbelo continues inviting us to consider our own relationships with divine mystery, spiritual authority, and the eternal human quest for authentic encounter with ultimate reality that transcends all limitations while embracing the full diversity of spiritual experience and mystical insight. The gentle rhythm of eternal questions and the timeless flow of divine emanation carry continuing whispers of ancient wisdom and contemporary possibility that connect all generations in the shared human journey toward understanding our place within the cosmic processes of divine creativity and spiritual return, reminding us that the most profound discoveries often emerge not from finding final answers but from learning to ask better questions about the mystery of divine nature and our eternal participation in the creative love that flows between transcendent unity and manifested multiplicity in the endless dance of spiritual emanation and return that characterizes all authentic religious experience and mystical transformation.